Hi, my name is Professor Jonathan White, and I teach at Bridgewater State University in Massachusetts. As well, I'm a longstanding board member and friend of Free the Children. I wanted to speak today about the issue of global education, that is, schooling for kids around the world. Currently, there are 100 million primary school age kids who are out of school. The regions with the biggest issues around not having kids in school are Africa and South Asia. In fact, nearly half of all kids who are currently not in primary school are from those two regions, with 31 million kids in sub-Saharan Africa not being in school and 18 million kids from South Asia not being able to attend school. 30% of all the children who aren't in school globally as well have some sort of disability that keeps them from school or culturally that blocks them from being allowed to go to school. In fact, only 5% of disabled children around the globe in poor regions will ever complete school. Although there's some good news over the last 10 years that enrollments into primary schools are going up, that those numbers have been increasing, unfortunately, we aren't seeing graduation rates increasing yet. In Africa, only 51% of children complete their primary school, and in Southeast Asia, only 74%. So we still have a long way to go there. Sadly, girls are disproportionately affected by the lack of education and the lack of access to education, particularly, again, in sub-Saharan Africa, in South Asia, and in East Asia. Here, in those three regions, 83% of all schoolgirls are out of school. Worldwide, for every 3 boys that are out of school, there are 4 girls who are out of school. For instance, in Yemen, girls are 3 times as likely to not be in school as boys, and the same is true in Iraq, where it's 3 times as likely for girls not to be in school. And in India, a key country in the world, 4 times as likely that girls won't be in school as boys. While girls' enrollment have been increasing all over the world, in every region around the world, and that's good news, there are some concerning trends that are taking place over the last few years that we're keeping our eye on as a world that may prohibit girls from attending school. For instance, the increasing numbers of HIV/AIDS amongst young people and amongst young people's parents are keeping girls out of school. If girls get HIV/AIDS, of course, it limits their ability to go to school. And if their parents or family members get HIV/AIDS, oftentimes it's the girl who's pulled out of school in order to care for her parents. As well, more and more orphans are appearing around the world, particularly due to conflicts. And as these kids become orphans, girls have very little chance of getting even a primary education. And finally, there's been an increase in gender-based violence around the world over the last handful of years, and much of that is targeted towards girls, and it makes them unsafe. It makes it unsafe for them to even travel towards school back and forth, and so they drop out. Why is it so important to focus in on girls' education? Why does the education of girls matter so much to us and to the world? Well, we know, for instance, that even 1 year of school leads to a great reduction in the fertility rates of girls. In other words, they're less likely to get pregnant. For 1 year of school, a girl is 10% less likely to get pregnant. Girls who are getting a primary education have lower infant mortality rates and child mortality rates for themselves, and when they go to have kids someday, when they become adults, their kids are less likely to die young as well. Women with education are much more likely to seek immunization, they're much more likely to understand child nutrition, and they're much more likely to have better understandings of sanitation practices. So girls being in school not only affect them positively, but affect their future families in the most important ways, because they will be the keepers of the health of their families. We know that girls in primary school have much lower rates of HIV/AIDS than girls who aren't in primary schools. And it's partially because they have this positive venue that they're in, and partially because they're learning the practices that can keep them from getting a disease such as HIV/AIDS. We know that girls who have a primary education, and this is an incredibly important thing, have a much higher wage rate when they're in the workforce, and that girls with a primary education are more likely to get work. Importantly, girls who get a primary education are also likely to carry that through to their family when they have kids. So there's intergenerational benefits of schooling, and that's true as well for boys. Overall, educated girls are more likely to be better nourished, they're more likely to be more productive at home, better paid in the workforce, and more likely to participate in the decision-making processes of their families and their communities, thus bringing empowerment to girls and women in communities where historically sometimes this hasn't so much been the case. They're less likely to get HIV or STDs, and they're more likely to raise children who grow up into adulthood. Unfortunately though, girls are also the most likely not to be sent to school because of cultural and sexist biases, and they're also the first ones who get pulled out of school whenever the family is in some type of emergency mode. And so girls' education is a difficult issue, and yet it's a key to the success of families, of communities, and ultimately of nations. So why overall, girls and boys, why are so many kids not in school? The first and most important catalyst, of course, is poverty. Deep poverty means that families can't afford to send their kids to school. Deep poverty means that families can't afford the time of their kids going to school, meaning that they can't allow their kids to go to school because they need their kids foraging for food or being part of the workforce of their family, the labor force of their family, so they can't send them to school. Poverty is the #1 driver of lack of education around the world. Another driver, however, is illness. When somebody has an illness in the family, the kids are pulled out of school in order to care for them. Other factors that are keeping kids out of schools, well, in a lot of countries, there's school fees. And the kids and their families just can't afford these very small fees to go to school. And so therefore, it keeps them from going. In other places, you'll find that kids can afford the school because it's free education, but they can't afford to pay for uniforms or a simple notebook. And these are required in order to go to school. And so not having a pencil, not having a notebook, not having a uniform may keep kids out of school. Other factors are, and this is a very sad fact around the world, there are a lot of areas where there aren't enough teachers for the schools. And this may be happening due to poverty, and also largely in many places, and tragically so, it's very hard in high HIV/AIDS regions to be able to train and keep teachers, because oftentimes by the time they're trained, the HIV virus has made them so ill that they're not able to teach in the classroom. And finally, the family's need for labor, whether it's in the fields or in household labor, largely for girls, oftentimes keeps kids from going to school. So it's a big problem, and all of us know that education is the key to success. That's true everywhere around the world. The more educated populations are, the better that they do in terms of human development, and the better that they do in terms of moving forward economically, in terms of human rights. So what can we do about this? Well, for starters, it would cost approximately $10 billion to put every kid into a high-quality primary school. $10 billion may sound like a big number, but don't forget that last year, right here in the United States, we spent $11 billion eating ice cream, $10 billion to put every kid into primary education. Secondly, as with all of the issues around children's rights, it's so important for us to educate ourselves about primary education and secondary education, education of girls, about the benefits of education. We have to educate ourselves, gain knowledge on this, and then spread awareness about it. One great solution that Free the Children has is an incredible campaign called the Brick by Brick campaign. And this is a campaign whereby we all go about trying to raise money to build schools in very rural areas where there are either no schools or insufficient schools, and thus putting kids in school who otherwise wouldn't have had a chance. If you join the Brick by Brick program, you can get a poster that comes to your school and slowly watch as your school builds a school brick by brick by brick by brick. Free the Children schools are incredible places. In these Free the Children schools, we've achieved near gender equality. In these Free the Children schools, a hot meal is provided, and what's so important about that is if there's a meal there, then families can afford to send their kids to school because the kids will be fed. And that's incredible. Our schools are doing great things because they provide basic literacy in a world where 1 billion people are illiterate and all the ramifications that come with that. There are gardens around many of our schools that help with the feeding of the community, help with the healthcare, with the herb gardens in many of these communities. All of our schools have water. All of our schools have sanitation. So clean water and sanitation help to solve many of the problems of communities. So it's not just a school, it becomes a school that's also there for sustainable development and a holistic model to move a community forward. There's so many solutions out there. This is a human-made tragedy. It would take $10 billion to put every kid in school, and we spent $11 billion eating ice cream. The solutions lie out there. It's a social problem with social solutions. Mahatma Gandhi, the great Indian leader, once said, if we are to have real peace, we must begin with the children. He also famously said, each of us must be the change we want to see in the world. And the key part of that sentence is the word be. Each of us must be the change we want to see in the world. We can achieve change. We can ensure that every child in the world receives a basic and good education.